Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're going to give folks just a few minutes to hop on, and we will begin shortly. Welcome to everybody who's joining us. We're going to give people just a couple more minutes to join, and we will begin in just a couple minutes. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. We're so glad you're with us this afternoon. My name is Kyle Myers-Skop. I'm the national organizer and spokesperson for EEN's Youth Engagement Ministry, Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, as well as EEN's Midwest Director. And I'm so glad that you've joined us today to have this conversation together. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording this, so be sure to share this with your friends and family afterwards. We'll be posting it to our YouTube channel, to social media, as well as to our website. So we hope that you'll be able to share this far and wide after our time together this afternoon. And I do want to invite you throughout the webinar to be asking questions of our panelists. If you navigate down to the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll find a Q&A button with 2 speech bubbles. If you click that, you have an opportunity to type in questions that you have for our panelists. You can do that at any time. So anytime inspiration strikes, be sure to click on that window and type in the question before you lose it. I'll be curating those questions throughout the time and asking those questions of our panelists toward the end of our time together. The chat function is also there. If you have any technical questions or issues that you would like some assistance with, feel free to chat me in there, Kyle Myers-Skop, and I will do my best to address those issues as they come up. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Reverend Mitch Hescox, President and CEO of the Evangelical Environmental Network.
Thank you, Kyle, very much, and thank you to our distinguished guests today and for their courtesy in being on here today with us. Before we get started, I'd like to share some sad news from the EEN family. This morning we learned that our Director of Women's Ministries, Beth Bond, passed away. We will all be praying and mourning for her. The staff's going to have a time of mourning later this afternoon, and there'll be more information as becomes available. But as we start this webinar, we'd like to begin in prayer for Beth and her family and for all the EEN team. So if you would please pray with me. Holy and gracious God, we thank you for your love. For you truly are the God of love, who comforts us when we're sad and when we mourn. And Lord, we ask for your grace as we continue our work as we're mourning. And Lord, especially we lift up the prayers for Beth and her mom and all of her family. Gracious God, receive Beth into your loving arms and help the family to cope, to grieve, and to come through this terrible anguish and pain. We ask this in the God of love, in Jesus. Amen. Thank you for praying with me. And the whole reason for doing this series of webinars is just exactly a month ago, the Select Committee, the House of Representatives Select Committee on Climate released a report called Solving the Climate Crisis, a congressional action plan for a clean energy economy and a healthy, resilient, and just America. In response to that roadmap, this is I believe, the fourth or fifth webinar in the series we're doing to help educate people, especially members of our faith community, the evangelical world. For our understanding is that climate change is the greatest biblical and moral threat to humanity at this time. It impacts every single one of God's children across the earth. But it's also a time for hope, because if we act on climate, we can build a resilient, sustainable world for everybody, not only our children, but God's children all over the world. And one of the great ways we can address that is through natural climate solutions. To me, it's one of the most helpful ways of addressing the climate problem and also offering clean air, reducing the amount of petrochemicals we have, and cleaning up our oceans at the same time. So with that, I am going to introduce our speakers today. I'm going to do both of them first, and then Sarah, I'm going to finish with you, so you're going to be the first speaker. It truly is an honor to have Dr. Ratan Lal here from The Ohio State University. He is a distinguished professor of soil science. In fact, this year he won the extremely prestigious, if I can speak this afternoon, food award, and I'm trying to think of it, the World Food Prize. And it is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for those in the agriculture business. So congratulations for being honored with that award. And you are truly one of the world's greatest experts. Growing up from a simple farm in India, which is a country I love and been there many times, to your work all over the world, and now with the Ohio State University. And even though that I am a Penn State fan, we gladly welcome the Ohio State University to this webinar today. And next, and our first presenter will be Dr. Sarah Cooley. She is Director of Climate Science at the Ocean Conservancy. Before that, she worked and studied and did a postdoc, I believe, at Woods Hole, one of my favorite places in the whole world to go to. So I love going to Woods Hole. Her PhD, I think, is from the University of Georgia. Is that correct? And she is literally an expert on our oceans. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Cooley for her presentation. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much. Let me begin screen sharing. Okay, thank you, Reverend, for inviting me today. And thank you to Kyle and the whole EEN for hosting this webinar. I'm going to spend the first part of my talk today telling you a little bit about the ocean consequences of ocean climate change, which might be less familiar to you, and then to tell you a little bit about how natural solutions can help with that. So the ocean covers 70% of the Earth's surface. It's also the primary regulator of Earth's freshwater supply, the Earth's heat budget, and the Earth's carbon cycle. Some call the ocean the blue heart and lungs of the planet, but I tend to think of the ocean as the Earth's heating, cooling, and plumbing system. I'm more of a technical type. So the ocean is the primary system that helps the Earth support life. It's our single largest buffer against changes in climate. Without the ocean's ability to absorb and release heat, we'd freeze or we'd fry. Without it, we wouldn't have enough rain to sustain life on land. The ocean is the Earth's largest storehouse of carbon, and in that way, it helps regulate temperature and plant growth around the world. And you already know the ocean feeds billions of people around the world too. So the ocean has absorbed 93% of the heat generated by excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it captures nearly 30% of the carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere every year. And by taking on that heat and carbon dioxide, the ocean has saved us from some of the most damaging impacts of climate change. But acting as the buffer has come at a real cost. And so many of the changes we're seeing on land have also been happening in the ocean. So you probably have heard quite a lot about ocean warming. As the planet warms, some of the heat transfers to the ocean. We know that on global average, the surface ocean has gradually heated about 1 degree Celsius since pre-industrial times, and the deep ocean is heating up too. This is turning up the temperature in just 200 years on ecosystems that haven't experienced this kind of change in thousands of years, or maybe ever. This photo was taken last year in June, And it shows the effects of floods melted from the Greenland ice sheet on indigenous groups during their traditional hunting and fishing activities. I find it completely stunning. We also are seeing changes in sea level, and that increases flooding. Sunny day flooding like this, even though it's a cloudy day, we still call it sunny day flooding. It decreases access to coastal resources, and it endangers the safety of communities along the coast, but it's also a conservation issue. Certainly storm-driven flooding is even more dangerous because every flooding event carries a big pulse of land-based pollutants into the coastal ocean. Another outcome of ocean heating is marine heat waves. They bleach and kill coral reefs, and they cause a variety of effects in other systems. This photo shows dead seabirds on a Pacific Northwest beach in 2014 from the heat wave known in North America as the blob. Impacts from the blob are still being cataloged, but they include things like massive seabird die-offs from California to Alaska, marine mammal death, and numerous impacts to fish stocks. We're also losing oxygen in the ocean. Warmer water carries less oxygen in it. It also mixes less fully from top to bottom. And so the ocean generated by ocean plants in the upper ocean isn't getting taken deep into the ocean the way that it used to. And this is robbing ocean life of the oxygen it needs to thrive. We are also seeing ocean acidification, which is a change in the ocean's chemistry caused when the ocean takes up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Ocean acidification has wide-ranging impacts on marine animals, all the way from making it more difficult for oysters and clams to build their shells, but also to decreasing some fish's ability to detect predators or find habitat that's good for them. Ocean acidification has caused really measurable harm to the US shellfish aquaculture industry, and researchers and managers are working to determine how to adapt to these unavoidable impacts, and also to strengthen the marine-dependent communities and industries like fishing and aquaculture so that they can be better prepared for the future. Impacts of ocean climate change go way beyond simply touching fishermen or beachgoers. The benefits that oceans are providing to humans are really interconnected, and they include the obvious things like fisheries, but also less obvious things like cycling of elements or cultural and spiritual identity. One of the effects that we're feeling the most are how ocean habitats are shifting. There's a clear trend across hundreds of marine animals that shows that they're all migrating north at about 5 miles a decade on average. So these habitat shifts have not only implications for the ocean, but also economic impacts. As fish try to move to new areas and leave other areas, fisheries are going to try to adapt by following the stock or by heavily fishing what's left. And this can really cause unsustainable fishing practices. We know that wealthier fisheries in higher latitudes near the poles can generally adapt better, and that really leads to inequitable outcomes. Human community impacts from climate are strong and really substantial. Indigenous groups that rely on marine harvests are feeling changes in their harvests, which impact their food security and also affects culture and sharing of traditional knowledge, language, and customs. Coastal users all over the world, their sense of place and opportunity is changing when the coastal systems that rejuvenate their bodies and their spirits are damaged. And so for solutions, we really need both mitigation and adaptation. It's not an either or. We need a portfolio of options. Mitigation is really the catch-all term we use to talk about a variety of actions that cut carbon dioxide emissions from human activities, but also actions that can sop up extra carbon dioxide using marine systems. And adaptation includes actions that will prepare ocean systems and the humans that depend on them to face the future that is undoubtedly going to be affected by climate change. This future might involve more severe storms, flooding, changes in biodiversity, and a different set of benefits for humans than people are currently accustomed to. So we need to plan ahead for that. And I'm here to tell you a little bit about blue carbon. There are some marine systems that actually help with both mitigation and adaptation goals, which is really cool. It's a win-win. These systems include salt marshes, tidal wetlands, mangroves, and seagrasses. Together, all those systems are called blue carbon systems. The reason they're called blue carbon is because they store a really, really high amount of carbon per unit area, more so than many land systems. And they do this by accumulating plant matter and detritus and broken up organic material over decades to centuries, and it gets locked away in sediments and protected from bacterial decay. And so this stores the carbon away from the atmosphere. Blue carbon systems are also providing adaptation benefits in a number of ways. They really buffer against storm wave runup and flooding. They host vast biodiversity. They provide nursery for young marine life. They help cycle nutrients and fresh water through the coastal zone. But unfortunately, blue carbon systems don't get as much love as other marine systems. Sometimes they're smelly and they're muddy and they're buggy. They're not always as strongly protected as they should be. Destroying the marshes and mangroves actually releases more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And it also decreases habitat and biodiversity that are needed so much to keep those coastal systems filtering water, moving those nutrients around, and providing habitat. So loss of these systems destroys those natural coastal buffers against wave energy and storms and keeps that system from taking up carbon in the future. So we need to protect and restore blue carbon systems all around the country. And so in the beginning, Reverend Mitch mentioned the House Select Committee report. That has a whole section on blue carbon systems. So our elected leaders are paying attention to blue carbon, and they do know a lot about how important these systems are and how they provide that double win. So here's a few thoughts about what we can personally do. First of all, we can raise our voices. We can let our leaders know that we need to cut carbon dioxide. We need to do it directly, but we also need to do it by using these nature-based solutions like blue carbon systems that are all around our coastlines. You can let your leaders know that we need to care for these systems. This means protecting salt marshes, seagrass beds, and mangroves from development and restoring degraded blue carbon systems. It takes a financial investment, but it's a nature-based solution that has many, many benefits. Another thing you can do is to be a steward of your own local water system. And this applies to everyone, no matter where you live. We can optimize our fertilizer use. If you follow the instructions on the bag, you're not throwing money or extra nutrients down the storm drain. If you have a septic system, make sure your system is in top working order. Similarly, make sure that oil and other pollutants don't get into groundwater or surface water. These small things really, really make a difference. Also, you can get familiar with the watersheds in your area and how they connect. All of a sudden, you're going to have a lot of opinions about how to care for waterways that provide your drinking water or carry away the treated water from your local sewage treatment plant. And then you can participate in community activities to restore and care for blue carbon systems. One way you can do this is become a champion of shellfish restoration activities. You can buy farmed aquacultured oysters and clams. They're helping provide a win for the environment, and they're tasty too. They're called ecosystem engineers, and they capture the sediments and then they filter water on their own. So these are just a few of the ideas that we have for you to engage. And of course, we'd love to continue to chat. And I thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the end. Thank you.
Mitch, you're on mute.
There we go. Thank you so much, Dr. Cooley. And now, Dr. Lau, we look forward to hearing from you. Dr. Cooley, you're muted. If you would unmute yourself. Dr. Lau, rather, I'm sorry.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to begin with talking about world peace and soil quality. It's my belief that degrading soils and denuding landscapes, recurring drought and intensifying heat waves, low crop yields and perpetual hunger, poor nutrition and increasing malnourishment, marginal living and desperateness are bigger threats to global peace and security than even ICBMs, nuclear weapons, and other weapons of mass destruction. And there are several ways that we can prevent land degradation, and that is through better agriculture. The resources used for agriculture at the present, 38% of Earth's terrestrial surface is used for agriculture. 75% of agricultural land is allocated to raising animals. 70% of global freshwater withdrawal is used for irrigation. 30 to 35% of the global greenhouse gas emissions are contributed currently by agriculture. And yet, in spite of that, 1 in 7 persons is food insecure globally, and 2 to 3 in 7 are malnourished. Out of 820 million globally food insecure, 40 million are in the US, 1.7 million are in Ohio. How do you meet the food demands? I think the world already produces enough food to feed 10 billion people. If that's the case, how can the food security be met? Reducing waste, 30 to 50% of it, 30% officially in the US alone. Increasing access to food by addressing poverty, inequality, wars, and political instability. Improving distribution of food, increasing uses of plant-based diet and alternate sources of protein. Accepting personal responsibility. Each one of us is a culprit and victim both. And we must not take resources for granted, especially food. And we must increase productivity from our existing land, restore degraded lands, increase biological nitrogen fixation by legumes, and convert some agricultural land and water back to nature through sustainable eco-intensification and restoration of soil health. We must reconcile the need for advancing food and nutritional security with the absolute necessity of improving the environment. It's not either or. We must have both. So what is this eco-intensification? This strategy is to produce more food from less land, from less water, from less input of fertilizer and pesticides, from less consumption of energy, and from less emission of greenhouse gases. And that's the idea of producing more from less, by increasing efficiency and reducing waste, including of food. Now, if we did proper agriculture, we got population right now about 7.8 billion. In 2050, it'll be 9.8 billion. By 2100, about 11.2 billion. Per capita calorie consumption right now is about 3,000 calories. It'll be probably about 3,300 calories by 2100. Cereal production right now, 2 million tons. And it's about 3 million later in 2050 and so forth. The land area right now under cereal production is 700 million hectare. It is estimated that we need 200 million hectare more by mid-century. I don't think so. I think we can save that land. We are using 200 million tons of fertilizer now. We can easily cut it down to half by improving efficiency. Our cereal yield globally is about 3 tons. We can easily get it double or even more than that. So therefore, the idea is to reduce consumption of resources, land, water, fertilizer, chemicals, and increase their efficiency through better agriculture. The protection of soil, we have 3 options. What we heard about the US Senate a couple of weeks ago is one option, and I'll come to that in a minute. Stewardship is one. We just heard about oceanic stewardship. Economic incentive is another one. And of course, the legal option is a third one. Let's take one by one each one of them. Let's look at the commonalities amongst different religions of the world as far as protection of soil and natural resources is concerned. Let's begin with Judaism. The word homo, man, is derived from the Latin word humus, or the decomposed organic matter in soil. It's the essence of all terrestrial life. And the Hebrew phrase tikkun olam, repairing or restoring the world or the land. Hinduism, human body is composed of kshati, jal, pavak, gagan, samira, that's soil, water, energy, space, and air. If human body is made of those elements, do not degrade them. You degrade human body with it. Sikhism, this is one of the most beautiful one I come across. Pawan Guru, Pani Pita, Mata, Dhart Mahat. Guru is water, father is jal, Guru is wind, father is water, and Mata, mother, Dhart, land, Mahat, greatest is the Mother Earth. In one phrase, this religion talks about 3 most important part of the nature together. Buddhism, one should not break even a branch of a tree that gives us a shelter. Christianity, the word Adam is derived from the Hebrew word Adamah, means earth or soil. So human is made of soil. Greek, the daughter of earth goddess Gaia. There was a book called Gaia by Jim Lovelock, named Themis, goddess of love. Her descendant Dimitri was the goddess of agriculture and fertility. Romans, the earth goddess Tellus, was related to the goddess of fertility, and Ceres, the goddess of cereal, named Mother Matrathera. Islam, he created the man of clay like the potters. We made from water every living thing. Do not overuse water even if you are on a running river. Prophet Muhammad. Khalil Gibran, you may remember him, philosopher of Lebanese origin, an American. He said, trees are poems that earth writes upon the sky. We fell them down and then turn them into paper so that we may record our emptiness. The other possibility is payment for ecosystem services. If we expect farmers to manage land properly to create ecosystem services, such as protecting soil, protecting climate change, protecting water quality, biodiversity, we, the consumers of agriculture, should be willing to pay them the price, part of it, not completely, at least part. I estimated at about $16 per acre, $40 per hectare. That's a small price, but if that encourages them to do the right thing, let's do it. And the other part is legal. Just as universal rights of human, rights of animals, soil is a living entity, Gaia. Same thing concept from Jim Lovelock. Therefore, soil and nature must also have a rights to be protected, to be restored, to thrive and manage judiciously. Therefore, violator of those rights should have some implication. I think if I'm asked how to mitigate global warming, purify air and water, and end global hunger and malnutrition, the logical response would be to change the ways soils are taken for granted and abused to produce, transport, process, and consume food, and misused to procure food, feed, fiber, fuel, and bricks, and many other ecosystem services. Therefore, a prudent strategy would imply making soil, water, and agriculture an integral part of this solution, and empowering farmers. And many of the farmers in developing countries are women cultivating 5-10 acres of land, and the land managers to produce more and more from less and less by reducing waste, increasing the eco-efficiency, restoring degraded soil, afforesting the denuded land, and saving soil, water, and other resources back to nature. Save it for nature. And Reverend, thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Thank you so much for both a very stimulating conversation, and I'm going to ask a few questions that sort of we thought about. I think you both covered the stewardship question really well. So I'm going to turn to Dr. Cooley first. You mentioned a little bit about this in your talk, but you know, a lot of our residents, especially in the South, live along the coast, North Carolina through Alabama. How can they directly get involved in some of these practices of, especially of restoration? What are the ways that they can engage and get their hands dirty, be part of the solution?
That's a great question. I think that one of the things I always really like to point to is that people generally don't know a lot about our National Estuarine Research Reserve System. All around the country, there is a network of estuarine research reserves, and they're fundamentally operated by NOAA. It's a NOAA arm. And there is some wonderful research and conservation and education going on in these locations. And those groups, those areas are where you know, local folks have their fingers on the pulse of what is happening in terms of conservation and use locally. So I would encourage folks to kind of look into those research reserve systems that are near you. Look into your state's Sea Grant office and learn more about what they're doing to maintain and improve the health of coastal wetlands and seagrasses, and the few mangroves that we do have in North America. They're fascinating areas. And I think one of the first things that folks need to do is simply realize just how worthwhile they are. I went to grad school in Georgia, as you noted, and almost our whole marine science department was involved in wetlands research. And being a blue water oceanographer, I was kind of like, ew, that's smelly. But I went down to Sapelo Island a couple of times with my colleagues, and I learned more. And I was really, really impressed at just how these systems are so intricate and so beautiful in their design and their interconnection, and how they kind of silently support all of us. So I do think learning about those systems is step one. And then really kind of seeing where they can plug in these sort of nationally, there's national networks of research and restoration.
Thank you so much. Dr. Lau, the other part of our community is really centered in the Midwest. I mean, we have a lot of our community who are in the farming community. And we know that we've lost a lot of topsoil in the United States in the past 100 years. So could you talk about that loss a little bit, and then how people who are in the farming communities can take charge to both restore the topsoil and to sequester carbon?
Thank you. That's a very good question on soil. Yes, soil erosion, both by water and wind, have really been a problem. I do not know whether people know the history when the plow was invented. What we call motorboard plow, it was invented, designed by Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson eventually contacted a blacksmith at that time, and that was Charles and John Deere, father and son, to manufacture the plow and sell it. And the idea was to implement the Homestead Act, that when you have that parcel of land, I think it was 1/4 of the 1 mile by 1 mile, 640 acre, 1 square mile. If you can rehabilitate it, use that, show that you are plowing it, it's yours in a certain period of time. That was the idea. That practice continued until the 1930s, the Dust Bowl, the Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath and what happened. And then came the Soil Conservation Service, which of course talked about how to restore those land. At that time, the estimate was perhaps as much as 75% of the land is seriously degraded by erosion. But since then, now, 80, 90 years later, through better management, through good work of Natural Resource Conservation Service, many soils have been restored. A lot of forests have been improved. We have come up with the concept of no-till farming. Do not plow. You know, the plow that developed by Thomas Jefferson and group. And so do not plow. The idea, although the plowing has proven to be excellent, and the experiments in Ohio go back to 1960, hardly 30% of the cropland in Ohio is under no-till. And that too only 1 year, not every year. Also throughout the US, it's about the same trend. Otherwise, if you take South America, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, they have really gone way ahead, especially use of cover cropping. So we can restore and correct erosion by better agricultural practices. We had a CRP program, Conservation Reserve Program, which had 40 million acre at some point, where farmers were told, if you don't plow this steep, highly erodible land, you'll be compensated so much. Its impact on Mississippi's sediment load, so they don't have to dredge it very often, has been dramatic. It's very important success story. One other last thing I want to mention, erosion has good taste. It removes only the best part of the soil, which is the organic matter content and clay, because both are light fractions. They are lighter than sand, silt, and gravels. So erosion progressively takes away the best part of the soil, especially the organic matter content. So most soils of the Midwest have lost about 30 to 40% of their original organic carbon stock. Consequently, each acre of land may have lost somewhere between 10 to 20 tons of organic carbon. If I take the soil of Africa and South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, that southern part of Asia, highly densely populated, the carbon lost is 75 to 80%.
Wow.
The the concentration in soils of Asia and Africa may be less than 0.1%. Fortunately, soils of the Midwest, concentration of organic carbon is still about 1%. It should be 2%. 2 versus 1 in the US, 2 versus 0.1 in Asia, Africa, and Caribbean, Haiti, Central America. We need to restore carbon back. Just like we were talking about the blue carbon restoration, here we are talking about soil carbon restoration. And that is what I've been suggesting, rewarding farmer. It's a rewarding for sequestering carbon in soil through payments for ecosystem services. It's not a subsidy. It's not a handout. It's not a charity. It is what we expect them to do, and we reward them for doing it. So it can be done and should be done.
And I'm going to give one follow-up question each, and then I'll turn it over to you, Kyle. Dr. Law, I'm going to go right back to you since you hit one of my things, and I'll finish up with Dr. Cooley. One of the bills that just got introduced in Congress recently was by Senator Braun and Stabenow and White House. It was called the Natural Climate Solutions Act, which basically helps the Department of Agriculture to set a standard unit of measurement for carbon sequestration that farmers can sell in trade. You know, is that a good practice to do for farmers? Does it benefit them? What would you think on that?
I think it's a right direction. It's a good direction to follow, and I really commend. I did have Senator Brown from Ohio mention to me that that was the thing discussed. In fact, I was mentioned by name during that discussion. Here is my concern. The concern is, how do you reward farmers by so-called trading carbon credits? I have promoted carbon farming. Just like you grow corn, soybean, milk, beef, you also grow carbon and trade. So when you sell beef or corn or soybean, you know what you're weighing and you know what the price is. It becomes very difficult when you're trying to sell carbon, which nobody is taking away. It is faith that it is there. So what happens is, when the cap is not put on emission of fossil fuel, as it was required in 1997 Kyoto Treaty, US signed it but did not ratify it. Therefore, we had no cap on burning fossil fuel, but Europe did. So there is no demand, although there is a plenty of supply. So although Chicago Climate Exchange was established, right now, if you Google the cost of carbon credit, that's 1 ton of CO2, you may find it's 25 cents a ton. At 25 cents a ton doesn't buy a farmer for 1 acre, even a half a cup of coffee. Forget it. So there's a difference between market price that depends on demand and supply, which depends on whether you're going to have a cap on fossil fuel combustion or not, versus societal value. Societal value is what it exactly does. And the price I indicated of $40, it was based on the assumption that the carbon cost is $120 a ton of C, carbon. Mm-hmm. And we sequester net about 1/3 of a ton in the Midwest. That's where that $40 comes from. So there's a difference between 10 cents and $40. Right. Unless that happens through legislation, I'm afraid we are not going to make a major impact.
That very good. Thank you so much for that. And now, Dr. Cooley, before we turn it over to those on the line, mm-hmm. I'd like for you maybe to address something that maybe it's throwing as a curve to you, but the intersection of soil loss and pollutions and water mm-hmm. are something we're very familiar with in the United States called dead zones.
Right.
And could you talk a little bit about how they're destroying our oceans? And I believe there's over 100 dead zones around the world, if my memory is correct.
Yes, and you know, we're seeing more. So briefly, just to kind of like give folks a little bit of a background, whenever we lose organic material, plant material from land, and it gets washed into waterways and taken out into the coastal zone, that plant material can get digested by bacteria in the water. And that's a normal process. That's not a strange thing. But when we have too much of that running into the coastal ocean or into the rivers, we can get overgrowth of the microbial life that digests these things. And then when we put additional nitrogen and phosphorus through fertilizers into those waterways, you get these thick blooms of algae. And we know that harmful algal blooms are also on the rise. And you can have a dead zone from just a non-toxic bloom, but you can also have dead zones from toxic or harmful algal blooms. And I mean, they're all harmful, really, in one way or another. But when you have too many, it can suffocate the water column because that microbial activity digests all those algae and then robs the water of the oxygen that the fish and the other animals need to live. So we're seeing an increase in those partly because of overall warming and changes in ocean and coastal circulation, but we're also seeing it because of poor land practices, like what Dr. Lal objected to. And so there really is sort of a coast I guess the other way around, right? Land to coast continuity. I recently was talking with a colleague from Hawaii, and in Hawaii, in the Hawaiian culture, there's this concept of ridgetop to reef. So they're thinking there's this sort of ethic or precedent of thinking about the entire watershed from the mountaintop all the way out to the reef edge. And I think we need to learn more about that way of thinking, because that's going to help us do better at preserving land, but also thinking about the downstream impacts of those runoff events into the coastal zone.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Kyle now to field some of the questions from our participants.
Thanks, Mitch. Terrific conversation so far, and it's sparking a lot of questions from our audience, so I want to make sure to get to those with the time that we have left. First, I want to note that a question was asked of Dr. Cooley in the chat about resources for learning more about blue carbon. That was something that caught the imagination of someone. They want to learn more. Dr. Cooley responded in the chat with a link, so be sure to check that out if that was something that interested you. Find that link and learn more there. Another question for Dr. Cooley that's come through: would you discuss the status of corals and their role in the ocean ecosystem?
Certainly. What a connection based on what I just said. So corals are some of the most iconic things that we know, ecosystems that we know about in the ocean. They really capture folks' imaginations. They're beautiful, they're mysterious, they're just teeming with life. You know, the comparison has been made that corals are like the rainforests of the sea, and they really are. They're home to countless species, and they're all interconnected. Corals are not doing so great. They are experiencing marine heat waves, and they're getting bleached. They're experiencing more and more diseases that are, the diseases are thriving in warmer temperatures, and they're also suffering from ocean acidification, which tends to weaken their skeletons and prevent them from reproducing and growing in a healthy way. And so corals have also been compared to sort of like the first sign of really profound ocean damage. There's been a ton of work on restoring corals and safeguarding them and understanding, you know, sort of how can we help corals adapt? Do we need to take intensive measures to garden new resilient coral animals and then plant them out on the reefs? Can we protect them from other pollutions from land or breakage by boats and divers? There's a whole lot of really wonderful conservation efforts around corals because they capture our imagination so much. But it's really important for us to save them because they do host so much biodiversity. They slow down storm waves that are rolling in onto tropical shorelines. And then, you know, they're nurseries for not only reef fish, but also for other fish that live, you know, elsewhere when they're grown up. And reefs really feed billions of people around the world through small scale fisheries. And all of those things make it just really critical that we go ahead and really do all that we can to save the corals. It's going to teach us a whole lot about how we can conserve other sensitive ocean areas.
Thank you, Dr. Cooley. Dr. Lal, we all know that the pie of public attention is limited, and we all know that the pie of public resources and private investment is finite too. And in a time when so much attention and so many resources seem to be going toward urban issues, and when urbanization is increasing, how do we get people to understand the challenges facing farmers and farms and rural communities and agriculture in general? How do we increase awareness and make sure those limited funds are going where they need to rebuild our soils?
Thank you. I think the awareness about the importance of natural resources, soil, ocean, so that they are not treated as a common. We are now using soil and atmosphere and ocean as a dumping ground for the human byproducts and waste. And that's leading to the tragedy of the common. We have global warming, we have soil degradation. I think one part which I should have mentioned, and that is the relationship between soil and life that everybody should understand. There is no life without soil, and there is no soil without life. They have evolved together. That was Charles Kellogg of USDA who coined that phrase about 78 years ago. And I would like to mention that much larger biodiversity exists in soil, almost 25–30% of total biodiversity is in the soil. So misuse of soil really is a very serious issue in terms of biodiversity. I do not know that people know this, that 95% of all the antibiotics that we take for our cure and medicine and we are given to our animals, they come from microbes in the soil. So keeping the soil pristine is very important. I was asked about a month ago to give a talk to high school and secondary school teachers about where does the food come from. That was the question, where does the food come from? And my answer, it's the soil, stupid. Whereas soil is the source of food. 95% of all food we, and that means including the fishery, majority of the food we consume still come from soil. And important part that general public does not know, especially the urban population, because of the disconnect between people and nature, is that the health of soil, plants, animals, people, and the environment is one and indivisible. The base of that pyramid of the interconnectivity is soil. So the soil health is degraded by excessive plowing, by indiscriminate dumping of fertilizers and pesticides, by farming practices which are injurious to the topsoil for erosion or for depletion, degradation of organic matter content, or for loss of biodiversity. They all eventually end up impacting us as well, one way or the other, and the entire environment. That's why I was trying to mention, we have Air Quality Act, we have a Water Quality Act, but there is no Soil Quality Act. How is it ever possible to have air and water clean if they are not purified by the soil, which is the base on which they depend? So this is all education. I think we should make sure that right from the primary school and then middle school and secondary school, and the environment and soil and land and water resources, climate are part of the curricula. And then as far as the teaching is concerned, I think I would go back to religious leaders in addition to the school. Each religion, does not matter what, all of them have a very common message: protect nature, protect natural resources, Mother Earth. I think they can be the source of giving that message back to, regardless of what faith you are. That's why I showed all of them. Quran indeed turned out to be the best amongst all. So any religion, any faith, I think we go back to them and say, please spread this education of the importance of nature and how to protect it. Education, the key. And then asking policymakers, help us translate science into action. Governance is very important. People like me who do research cannot be very effective unless our research is translated into action. And that action comes from policymakers. So they must understand what the science says. And sometimes the problem lies not with them, it lies with people like us to make sure that we put our data in a way that common people, especially the policymakers, can understand.
That's wonderful, Dr. Law. Thank you. I think I just learned 5 new facts, each more mind-blowing than the last. That was terrific. Dr. Cooley, I wonder if you could say a word about the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. It feels like a long time ago, but we know ecosystems take a long time to recover. Are we still seeing effects? Is the ocean still seeing effects, and is it still recovering? And what are those effects?
Well, we are tracking that at Ocean Conservancy. Unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for that because that's very outside my area of expertise. But I do have a colleague at Ocean Conservancy who does specialize in that. So to the listener who asked that great question, please send me an email and I'll connect you with my colleague and you can get the real deal, because I wouldn't want to give you the wrong information.
Great, thanks, Dr. Cooley. Dr. Lal, we have a great question here that I would love to hear you answer. The attendee is interested in hearing your opinion on what are we missing when we look at soil that's covered in crops, things are growing and it looks fine, but the soil's actually degraded underneath it. What are some of the clues that we can't see that point to soil degradation? If I may answer it in a new way, what do you see when you look at soil that we don't see?
Thank you. When a soil is degraded, we sometimes mask, cover up the degradation effect by inputs of other resources from outside. For example, when the fertility goes down, we try to compensate by adding chemical fertilizers. When soil cannot hold water, we try to irrigate it. When soil is too compacted and crusted, we try to plow it. When soil becomes acidic, like ocean acidification we heard, we try to lime it. And temporarily we cover up. We push the problem under the rug. And that's exactly what happens. So if the soils are healthy, for example, one of the research me and my students have been doing, if you increase organic carbon content in the soil by 1 ton per acre, how much saving will you have in nitrogen fertilizer? How much saving you will have in sprinkler irrigation, those pivot system that you see sometimes flying west from eastern part. How much saving in pesticide you have. When soils have a very high biodiversity, they have a natural immunity. Just like human, when they are healthy, they have a natural immunity. And this is called disease suppressive soil. Soils have microorganisms which suppress pathogens. They predate on pathogens. And some of these disease suppressive characteristics can be imparted to the soil by using a mature compost, a good compost, adding to the soil. So I think what I'm trying to say is that plowing is not the best way to overcome the compaction. Adding chemical fertilizer, especially indiscriminately, excessively, is not the solution to overcome the depleted nutrients. Adding lime is not necessarily the best way. If we improve the soil health and the parameters of soil health, number 1, organic matter content, number 2, the biodiversity of the soil, and you can't see that very well because earthworm you might, but microbe you can't, and also improving the soil structure. Soil structure is the biopore, the pores, through which gaseous emission, water retention, nutrient diffusion, root penetration, all those things have. Those are the natural characteristics. Darwin's first book was not on origin of species, it was on earthworms. And he called earthworm the intestines of the earth. So a soil which does not have earthworm, that is one indication that that soil is not very healthy. And healthy soil should have about 5 tons of live biomass of earthworms, centipedes, millipedes, microbes. Many degraded, depleted soil have hardly 1 ton or half a ton. And that is when I call soil is becoming sick. And sometimes soil becomes dead. And when soil is dead, even when you dump chemicals and fertilizer and water and have improved varieties, it does not respond.
Thank you, Dr. Lau. And Dr. Cooley, I wish we had more time for more questions, but unfortunately we're bumping up against time. So I will hand it over to Mitch to close us out.
Again, to our experts, thank you so very much. And if we may be so bold, could we maybe submit the unanswered questions to you for maybe a short written answer that we could then put up on the website and take care of, if that would be permissible?
Sure.
We would love to do that, and also stay in touch with you, because I mean, I have a realm of questions and that I would just like to continue myself to ask both of you, because you know, one of EEN's jobs is to translate what you two just talked about to our community in our faith values. You know, in Leviticus, it says that human beings don't own the earth, God does, and we are just but tenants. And being a tenant means has a responsibility, and that's being a good steward. And that's what we're trying to teach our community, that even the Bible says we have a responsibility. So again, I want to thank you so much for being part of this. You just made my afternoon, especially in the midst of a sad day. You helped make it a little brighter for us at EEN. And so again, thank you. I want to invite that we are having one more webinar on faith next week. And Kyle's going to put that up right now, I believe. And so we invite you to be part of that as well, talking about biblical requirements and looking at not only those in the majority world, but how people of color are more impacted here in the United States from climate change and its impacts. And so, again, I just would like to close us out with a word of prayer and a special thank you to our guests. So thank you so much for being here. Let's pray.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you,
Sure.
Reverend. Bye.
Holy and gracious God, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for the wisdom that you've given our presenters today and so much valuable things they taught us. So Lord, no matter what they believe, may you bless them. May you guide them. May you open their hearts up to know your love. And Lord, we are again so appreciative. And especially to those who are on this webinar, may they find the peace, may they find the calling, and may they truly be about caring for God's creation. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so very, very much. God bless to all of you.
Thank you.